Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the panel that is going to talk a little bit about social mobility. I think Jonathan introduced the session fantastically, so I'm going to waste no time in getting into the conversation. We've got a fantastic panel here, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves in a minute and talk a little bit about what their individual organisations are doing and the workplace to promote social mobility. So we're going to start from this side, and I'll let James introduce himself.
Hi, I'm James Bardrick. I'm the head of the UK for Citigroup, based in Canary Wharf. I've been with the firm for just a little over 32 years, but my interesting fact is that before that I was an industrial management apprentice for GKN, an engineering company, and so had some first-hand benefit of learning and working at the same time.
Fantastic, thanks. Michelle Prance, I'm Innovation and Strategy Director at Lloyds Banking Group. And a couple of things that we are working on in terms of looking at apprenticeships. So last year we had 1,500 apprentices come through our apprenticeship scheme, ranging from the ages of 16 to 60. And we've got some fantastic examples of people who perhaps were security guards now working in cybersecurity, and people really transforming the way they're doing that. We also look and do a lot of work up in the north, helping people with their digital skills. So there's a real link with both social mobility and how many digital skills you have. We've got an academy up there that we've trialled in Manchester. We had 30,000 people look at the portal, and 250 people come from all different walks of life up there, come through to, as Jonathan said, start to untangle some of the myths about finance. So we're doing a lot of things actually looking at how we break that down. And quite importantly, not just in London, we're looking at this from a regional perspective.
Great. Hi, so I'm Elizabeth Corley. I'm with Allianz Global Investors. I also am a non-exec on a few other boards in other industries, and it's very interesting to compare how financial services approach this versus other sectors where there are greater links to academia around the world and around the country. If I think about what Allianz Global Investors is doing, I'll just highlight a couple of things beyond the typical corporate and social responsibility that everybody does. I think one of the most important things is getting behind citywide campaigns like the diversity initiative that the Lord Mayor does, She Can Be, which brings particularly young girls from underprivileged areas in to see what they can be and to see them fulfill themselves. Plus we take not education, but very simple presentations, engaging presentations about money and saving in very non-complex terms into schools to help children feel much more comfortable and empowered about talking about money. And I would say that's more of a game type feeling than it is education. And we believe the earlier that starts, the better. It's not something that should be left till secondary school, but that's something that's really exciting to see take root.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Axford. I'm the CIO at Unum. Unum are an employee benefits company, focusing really on financial protection of employees through the workplace. I think the challenge for us is that we're a very small organisation here in the UK. Got a US parent, which is 10 times the size of us, but we only employ about 800 people here in the UK. And so for us, when you haven't got a brand that's well known out there, and you're not working in an industry that's very sexy. I mean, insurance is bad enough, but when you get into group protection, it's even worse. And so we've got the challenge of really getting out there and selling what we do to people. And we found over the last couple of years, the biggest success we've had is going out to local schools and into the secondary schools and sending out what I would say is a diverse set of our employees. So traditionally, it would have been the top managers go out and you talk to people, but you're not taking out the whole experience of the organization when you go out and visit these schools. And as I say, the feedback we've had by going out where we've taken a lot of the women, ethnic diversity, educational diversity, taking groups out and just getting people to talk their story, explain a bit about what they've done, how they ended up in the career they've ended up with, and how they got there and the route they'd followed, really opened up a lot of minds in people's minds about basically what they needed to do through their GCSEs into A-levels or off into universities. So we're doing a lot in the local communities, but I think getting out and just talking to people has been one of the big factors that's been successful for us in recent years.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. We definitely want to hear from everyone in the audience, and you can submit questions at any point in time. So as they come through, I will have a look, and we will definitely prioritize your questions because we want to hear what's on your minds, and for you to ask any questions to our esteemed panel. And listening to you talk, I'm always thoroughly impressed by how individual organizations take this as an agenda and then work through kind of opportunities to kind of like try and promote this, whether it's the social mobility agenda or digital skills, which we talked about, which promotes this as well. But I'd like to hear from the panel, how do we connect these dots? How do we make sure that we promote this on an industry-wide level, that we uplift the entire financial services industry to get to this point?
Can I take that? I mean, one of the things I think we can do is to get out and actually share experiences of what we've done. Every company is different. Everyone's circumstances will be different. And actually, we should all want to be different. One of the worst things that happened, in my opinion, to financial services is that in many, many aspects, including talents, there was a narrowing of focus so that it became received wisdom that the type of person you wanted was this person who fits like this on this spreadsheet. And you'll all have seen it, you know, a small number of universities, mainly, if not exclusively, Russell Group, an increasingly narrow range of academic courses feeding the preferred candidate profiles of many, many firms. And before you know it, the bunch of people around you are all hardworking, they're all very talented and very competent, but boy and girl, they can be very, very similar, not just in the way, what they do, but in how they do it as well and the approach they bring to it. And really the whole benefit for us is thinking about how do we get a bunch of people that bring really quite a lot of difference to the way they think based on different backgrounds, different experiences, different approaches, and that fitting unbelievably well with the fact that we've also got to change the mix of the capabilities and the characteristics of our people as you think about the digital age, what our customers want from us, how we disrupt ourselves as an industry and as an organization, and we want more innovation, we want more creativity, we want more engagements, and you know, really wanting inclusion and diversity for that reason. And then you take that and say, well, what do we do? And I think a great example of that would be what we found ourselves initially forced to do in Belfast, where there was a very thin traditional talent market. But and I was delighted to hear you talking about the engagement with schools and universities. So needs must, you engage with the higher education colleges and the universities in Belfast, and you actually start recruiting in scale, but with a very different range of people, very different from the type of people we traditionally hired in London, and found that something rather good was happening. It wasn't just that they were less talented in what they needed to learn to do, but how they did it really brought that more diverse background with it. But here was one problem. As we did that, and we originally did it very much on the technology side from Queen's and Ulster and the higher education colleges, we found that actually it was really tough getting young women into the process, and our application rates from women was much lower. So, and you made the point, you send out the whole range of your team from some more experienced people to younger people, and actually got them into engage. And as they went into the college, they found, number one, the problem was really that there weren't enough women there in the first place. So they then started work with the secondary schools around supporting STEM choices in academic areas. And actually it went back even further, and a couple of our team from our Belfast office, which is nearly 3,000 people now, up from nothing a dozen years ago, actually identified that what was really needed was helping primary school teachers in teacher training school understand technology and STEM, and actually that's where they ended up using. So it went a lot further and a lot deeper than we ever thought it would do, but it's had this wonderful result. Guess what else happens? Everyone in the firm knows about that, the community knows about it, they start telling stories about that, and oh my goodness, your brand and your reputation very much changes. You're not just another bank anymore.
I think just to build on that, so it's worse for autistic people. So there's only about 16% of autistic people that are in paid employment. And one of the networks that we've just created at Lloyds is around Think Your Own Way. And it is about how do you bring people from diverse backgrounds and how do you actually showcase some of the work that they're doing. Through that network, we've started to connect with other organizations, not just financial institutions. And what that's allowing us to do, also working with NAS, the National Autistic Society, is go, well, how can we be a much better employer, not just for autism, but for all other kinds of, you know, mental illnesses and disabilities. And what we've learned is we've been able to collaborate on things like, well, how do you create the job spec? You know, what's the kind of line manager training that you've done? And we can leverage those things because they're non-competing. So if you can find the right kind of purpose that you can work on together, there's so much to be gained from actually working with other people, trying to solve similar kinds of problems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it links quite closely to a question that someone in the audience posed to us. Because at WorldPay as well, we've decided to kind of sponsor a university master's because we found that there's a gap between the curriculum that you find either in schools or university and actually what happens when it is that people want to employ that in practice and in the workplace. And someone in the audience kind of asked the question, do we need to review the education agenda and make sure that we have the right skills and the right breadth of skills across that education agenda, whether that's in schools or universities, and quite a few of our organisations are involved in that space as well.
Yeah, I mean, the national curriculum is already packed. I mean, it's an absolutely intense curriculum, and everybody immediately says, let's change that and we'll fix the world, and we've had repeated attempts. I think definitely, and again, individual stories across the panel, we've worked with teachers to help skills around finance, engineering, technology, things like that. But I think there's also things you can do beyond the core curriculum. A lot of organisations are involved in outreach, in mentoring, in sponsorship, as simple as reading clubs or digital clubs. There's equipment in the schoolrooms. Many children would be able to have a much more engaged and experienced, better learning if they had digital technology in the schoolrooms. But when you are constrained, so I think there's a huge amount we can do, and it should start in schools. I think there's also scope for summer clubs. I think we're extraordinarily privileged, most people that live in the city, and we don't realise that for many people, what we're talking about is the luxury piece of icing on the cake of just having a decent education, that children leave school with the right competencies that mean they can have these choices. So I think we have to focus on giving children those choices, both within the curriculum but also outside it. And we shouldn't aim for the stars without making sure that our feet are on the ground.
And I think applying some of that learning that the kids are doing in schools is quite important. So, you know, we bring in a lot of people on work experience, but it tends to be individuals coming in to do work experience in a particular role and just shadowing. So we've started to think about whether you bring in a small pool of people, 2 or 3, 4 or 5 people, get them in, give them a business problem, and let them sit together, facilitated by the team, to try to deal with and work on a particular business issue that we've got. So that it makes it a bit more real than just maybe shadowing somebody and seeing how the job is. So changing the way we think about work experience, changing the way we think about internships, so that it's not just about the learning that people are doing in colleges and schools, but it's the applicability of that to a real problem, and how you connect that and make it real, excite people about the role, and try to get them in, certainly in my world, into IT. That's part of the challenge, you know. And we were talking earlier as a panel, I mean, you know, one of the things is that the roles in IT are changing. So a lot of people who've seen themselves, you know, really wanting to go down the route of doing art or data or analytics or whatever, you know, those roles, those creative roles, are ones that are much more demanding for us nowadays than the traditional skills we used to have. So I think trying to open up people's minds about the nature of the roles that they might end up having to look at 2-3 years out when they come out of the degree, you know, those roles are changing all the time, and the pace of change is increasing. So, you know, have the roles that people will be applying for when they finish their degree, actually, do they exist today? You know, probably not in some ways. So that's one of the things we need to try to get better at, is really helping people understand how their skills are applicable to the problems and challenges that we're facing.
And that probably fits to the part-time question we were posed.
Yeah.
Because I think we're now facing a world where people will be working a lot longer in a rapidly changing environment. So they've got to have the skills that are going to serve them throughout their working lives, and that will definitely include breaks for education, breaks for family reasons, breaks for other reasons. So how we embrace much more flexible working and part-time careers, I think, is going to be absolutely key. And a lot of companies try and do that, but I think financial services can be a little bit intimidating to people, so it's finding the human face of it to explain it to others, don't you think?
Yeah. James, you earlier kind of talked about something which I think is quite important, and that's around kind of changing the paradigms through which we recruit. You know, we all look for kind of like-minded, like people, and then especially in financial services, it becomes a challenge just because everything is quite intimidating. So someone in the audience asked, I think, what is quite an interesting question in that context, which is, how do you identify talent if you start changing that paradigm? How do you think about identifying the right people for the right job?
Well, I think first of all, you've got to stop being lazy. And I think a lot of people have been very lazy in defining talent as somewhere between the job of HR to continue to producing the number of milk round grads off the scheme who fit that fixed type of profile I mentioned earlier. The second thing is arguably even harder to deal with, which is to get rid of some of the biases which inevitably exist. I mean, it is really hard for some people not to believe that someone who reminds them a little bit of themselves at a younger age is likely to be the right person for this role, because if I did well in it, surely this person can. And actually, not only is the technical and the nature of the skills different, but the mindset these days is very, very different as well. But as I said earlier, we're trying to move people much away from the technical what we actually do to how we actually do it. And that's when this innovation and this creativity comes in. And of course, getting people to admit that they aren't perhaps as skilled in that as they are in applied mathematics and things like that can be difficult, or negotiating or whatever their particular thing might be. So I think I see this great opportunity of using the fact that we all intellectually accept that in order to disrupt ourselves, in order to improve and innovate in our offers to our customers and keep a competitive advantage, we do need a much different range of skills, and increasingly those are digital skills, they're data analytics skills, they're just a different mindset. But to actually then use that fact that we've got to change the mix actually also helps you break the just carrying on recruiting in the same old way. And sometimes you'll find that your HR department, who've got this down to a well-tuned art, really hate that change, that you don't want them to carry on doing what they've done for the last 10 years. You do want them to access a hugely wider range of talents at a much different range of places, using social media, using technology to get the opportunity and what we're looking for out there, and then actually also to start engaging with people in that very different way.
Yeah.
But I think there's a whole range of different activities in that space that are, not that we do them, but I've certainly talked to organizations who have done these things and made a real success of it. But, think of the organizations you partner with. So, we sit there, we do big RFPs, 4 or 5 organizations come in, 3 of them will present the team, and it's very much the traditional team you would have seen. Putting in diversity of the team as part of the factors of choosing an organization will get partners to start thinking differently. The agencies you use for recruitment, thinking about the diversity they bring in terms of the CVs, the talent. It's not just about what we do as an organization, it's leveraging that wider system. And then I think the other mistake we've made certainly is, you have an interview panel that's very much like the panel it's always been. So make sure the panel itself is very mixed and very diverse, and that gives you a different sense as well. So I think there's a lot of different things you need to do if you're thinking about different groups of talent and bringing people in. But, not one size will fit all, but there's a lot of different things you can try.
Yeah. So Jonathan also challenged us on transparency and kind of saying, what do we do to equal, for example, information around pay gaps? And someone in the audience asked for any comments that we have around actions that our individual organisations or industry can take, really, on trying to address some of these pay gaps that we see.
Well, I think things like the gender pay gap reporting, although people pushed back on it when it came, I think it's really helpful, because what gets measured actually concentrates attention and then gets done. So I think the fact that companies are forced to talk and explain, and it's very interesting to see that their explanations start within the company. It's forcing a degree of transparency within the company of people having to answer questions. And it also shines a very bright light on role disparity, because I think there's no organisation now pays men and women differently for the same job. I mean, if they did, that's against the law, and I can't think of one I've ever come across. But we have the wrong mix by gender and other minorities of opportunity to earn money. And I think that's really, really important. And things like gender pay gap reporting, diversity reporting, the fact that clients will ask you in a request for proposal, what are you doing about this? The fact that shareholders will ask you if you're a member of the board, governments will ask you, I think it's great. Yeah. I think it is about pay. It's also about opportunity for advancement and promotion, and I suspect all our companies have internal processes to make sure there's no bias, that you look at the data that comes out to make sure there's no bias in your processes and systems. I think the challenge, though, still, is there are certain periods, and it was said really well, where people go part-time or take a career break or maybe want to experiment and do something else. And a lot of our systems and processes are still too linear.
Yeah.
Michelle and I were talking about this earlier. If you assume a linear career, I mean, that's the 20th century. There are no linear careers anymore. So as well as thinking about transparency, which I completely support, I think you have to think about alternative career routes and continuous learning, giving people the chance to reskill. I had a woman come to me who wanted to have a family, and she was a saleswoman, a brilliant saleswoman, really valuable to the company in a sales role, and said, I have to retrain because there's no way I can be traveling for the next N years. That's not compatible with how I want to bring my children up myself. So she completely retrained and actually was brilliant at what she did next. Now she's come back in 10 years later on. But I think it's that mindset of really thinking through not just pay, but opportunity, promotion, competence-based skills. And the reality is that digital enables people to work in a much more flexible way. And so if we embrace that as part of how we run our businesses, it really opens things up, don't you think?
Absolutely. And, you know, we all publish targets that we've got, and we can all shy away from that. But actually, you know, we are not there yet, so we need to be transparent about that. And we do things with, you know, the wording on CVs. We work with specialist agencies now to make sure and put the onus back on them to say, actually, I want to see equal number of candidates here. So we do a number of those things. And I think what we were talking about before, Elizabeth, is that some of the systems, you know, even like your mortgage, for instance, doesn't support you if you want to go back to study or take a career break. Exactly. So we're looking at, you know, what are the innovations in product that will actually help support you, you know, on what will not be a linear life journey anymore, one where actually there'll be peaks and troughs, and how do we do that? Yeah. Microfinance was another one that we started to talk about, and microinsurance.
Yeah, just people, you know, in our world, you know, people used to take 25, 30 years in the same organization. Now they move around. So how do you get that level of protection? Individual products, you know, products that are portable. So it has an impact all the way through the organization, and just thinking about the way that you serve a very different workforce of the future. And that's certainly something that, you know, is front of mind for us as an organization. And I think the part-time bit, there was just one of the things going through my mind is that people coming back from maternity leave. I was talking to an organization who have made a real big difference in the number of women they have in senior roles. And it's really been around the way that they've been able to encourage women back after maternity leave to take a senior role. And a lot of it isn't that the organization doesn't say we're flexible, but the individual feels quite guilty coming in and taking a management role. You know, how will the team feel? How will the people think about me in the workplace? And so we've done quite a bit of training, or they've done quite a bit of training around the team to try to make sure that team members, you know, accept individuals coming back on a part-time basis and see them for the value they're bringing, and see them for the value that, you know, that would have been lost to the organization if that flexibility wasn't there. But again, you have to think about those groups of people, thinking about buddy systems so that they've got somebody who's been through it to go and talk to. That seemed to really work as well. So I think sometimes organizations sit there and say, we're flexible, job done. But actually, it's a bit broader than that.
We need really strong role models that you can actually see where, you know, job sharers have worked. And we need senior executives to step out and say, you know, I make sacrifices. I pick up my children on a Friday, you know, and that's a you know, a red line for me. So there are things where you need seniors to say, well, it's okay. It's okay to, you know, be 3 days or 4 days, or, you know, even if your working pattern is different, perhaps actually, you know, drop-offs in the morning so you work later. But you need role models so that people know it's okay and not feel that guilt.
So just on that point, you actually have to think about specific interventions sometimes that you can do differently that actually send a message that is believed and is credible. And we've done a huge amount of work at our place around using technology to really focus on the output of what people do rather than just the inputs, including what time they turn up in the office and what time they leave it, but actually what are they actually achieving in their work. And, you know, frankly, although we don't like people not engaging with each other all of the time, you know, there are very flexible ways of doing that, and technology has massively enabled that, not just in terms of working from home occasionally, but also working across multiple centres and between our various different offices. It's not all concentrated on London anymore. But if people start then challenging and say, yes, but if you look at the men who are sort of in charge of this place, none of them do that. And so you actually have to start saying, well, actually, let's attack that. And actually, I could be more productive. So I take one day working remotely via video and find that that works for me. And it already has changed the conversation around people saying it's just a carer's thing. And frankly, they say it's a sort of female thing. And you've just got to actually say, no, it's not. It's just a more efficient way of working thing and gives more choice and more capability where we can focus on people's outputs rather than just on hard inputs like presenteeism.
Fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about the international agenda on this. Most of us kind of work in global organizations, or at least in part will have offices elsewhere in the world or think about supporting this agenda and other locations. How do we, well, one, how do we compare as the UK on this agenda to other places where we have worked in a similar environment? And someone in the audience asked a question on, how do offshoring strategies affect this? Do we give away the opportunity to other jurisdictions that we could keep onshore?
I think that's a crucial point. And I think, we've been talking really well about inclusion, but we've been talking well about inclusion. We haven't talked about social inclusion fully. And I think we have to think very, very thoughtfully about how we reach out, not just to hire outside competence stereotypes, but also social stereotypes. And that means you've got to have a different language. And I think the purpose, so you talked about the what and the how, I think the why we do things, the fact that we're serving communities, we're serving people. And I think there's a big job to be done to reinvent the language we use and hold ourselves accountable for purpose. And that will really attract talent. That will attract people who want to make a difference to people's lives. And I think that's something we have to do collectively as an industry, because nobody will believe just any one individual company that tries to do a good job. We have to sort of reinvent ourselves, and I think the technology can help that hugely, because technology makes everything extremely transparent. As a board or as a CEO, you're no longer in charge of your brand because it's out there, it's socially available, it's socially judged. And I think that could be a powerful drive. And if we get that right in the UK, I think that would be a magnet for talent and a magnet for the right sort of talent that wants to change the world. So I think that could be very exciting.
Jana, you mentioned offshore teams. We've had quite a lot of success. Some of our mobile teams are offshore, but we've had quite a lot of success actually doing, hackathons where we'll work, at odd hours on a sort of 24, 48-hour period to solve a problem, bring all of those teams together. And, they'll be using the technology to communicate with each other across the globe. And actually that's been really effective at, just bringing those teams and getting them, gelling and cohesively working together. So you can do it if you deploy the technology, but I think you have to make a conscious effort to bring them in and get them working.
I think you've also got to recognise that it's a very good thing that there are huge amounts of talent in a huge number of places around the world, and they are very, very deserving for the kinds of roles and jobs that we as an organisation servicing a global client base produce. I mean, it's fantastic that we've got nearly 3,000 people in Belfast now, and I'm really, really proud of that. But it's also a fantastic group of people that we have in Poland, and we employ more people in Poland than we do in London. And that might be a surprise to some people, but technology allows us to do that. The availability of super talent and well-educated talent, both capability and character, allows us to do that. So we also need to make sure that we're very competitive and attractive as a country to make more Belfasts possible here in the UK. And if I look at what are the differences, and I mentioned that we weren't just another bank there, the way that our organisation has developed links with schools and the universities and frankly the Department of Employment and Learning in Northern Ireland, notwithstanding some of the functional issues they've had with government, actually is super. And there's a real strategy, and it's a really symbiotic set of relationships, and I just encourage more of that type of thing wherever you are in the UK.
Fantastic. One more question that came in from the audience, which I think is an interesting one to talk about, but how do we encourage men, in particular in senior roles, to take more paternity and supporting families?
I think it's about making it clear to people that it's all right to do it, and basically having that conversation. And I think, as you were saying earlier, it's about finding those role models who can then set the scene of what it's like and why it's important. So, it's difficult, but I think you've just got to find the role models and you've got to have those conversations to say to people, do it, just do it.
Yeah.
And don't continually confirm the cynical biases that, that exist and you know, promote people who are in the office till God knows what time because, you know, they're not at home. You've got to actually look at the whole person, the whole contribution, the type of character that you want as well as their particular input into what you're doing.
It's the great stories of, well, what was it like when I was off on paternity leave and you know, what did my wife do when I was off for 8 months? And it's those stories that bring it to life that enable people to think that's okay. And we just need more of it.
Absolutely.
And that's probably that cross-industry thing, you know, you won't all have those stories in your own organisation. And they're the types of stories you do need to share from other organisations to leverage that.
Yeah. Well, that was definitely a fantastic conversation, and I think our panellists have definitely given us a lot of food for thought and definitely, I think, tried to address some of Jonathan's challenges to us. But, you know, as individual organisations, we do a fantastic job and thinking about this and putting some practical solutions in the workplace. And I think collectively as an industry and the fantastic work that Innovate Finance is doing as well on this agenda, we can definitely do more. So I'd like to thank our panellists for contributing today, and thank you to the audience for all your questions.
Thanks, Helen.